The manhwa begins on a sunny day, with the Emperor of the Leinster Empire, Aranrod Aaron Leinster, seated carefully with people gathered in front of her. Suddenly a man's voice rings out, declaring to the Emperor that the time has come for her to choose the one worthy of her glory. Without wasting time, she points at a fox and shares that she's quite taken by the fox's brilliant, vivid color, asking whose prey it is. A lady steps forward and with a gentle bow, confirms that it's hers. The next minute, the Emperor announces the Countess the winner of that year's founding festival hunt. However, the Countess doesn't accept it. Her voice carries a hint of hesitation at first as she begins speaking, confessing that she believes the honor belongs to the Grand Duke Rourke, who brought down the rarer and more beautiful silver deer unlike her own catch. The Empress, with a hand resting slightly on her head, brushes off her words, claiming she was simply being overly modest. She explains that the boar of Marquis Bjorn was damaged entirely because it was stabbed too much with blades. She moves over to the Grand Duke's and explains that while the Grand Duke's deer might appear pristine at first glance, it had foam of blood in its mouth, something she links to it being signs it was deliberately toyed with and chased for a long time without being killed. She turns her head to the side and continues with her judgment, claiming her fox on the other hand bears no flaws aside from the single clean strike to its neck. She continues, insisting even the death of a mere beast must be dealt with grace and precision, and though a rarer and more prized prey than a fox may exist, there is no hunter more worthy than her. Moved by the Emperor's wise judgment, a soft word of gratitude escapes the Countess's lips. The Emperor, moving on, glances to the side of the Grand Duke and the Marquis, trusting that her decision had not caused them any displeasure. The Grand Duke's lip curls into a gentle smile as he gives his response, questioning how they could ever dispute the judgment of the Empire's radiant sun. On the contrary, he continues, claiming he could only marvel at her boundless wisdom. The Emperor goes silent for a while before speaking again. This time as she rises, she declares that marks the 200th anniversary of the founding of the Leinster Empire, and as a result she's prepared a banquet. She walks into the tent afterwards, her parting words, urging them to enjoy themselves to the fullest. Later, a man rushes to the side of the Marquis, calling it a shame after all he managed to bring down such a massive boat as well, but rather than feeling bad he simply responds in a detached tone, saying it's the Grand Duke who should feel even more regret. He continues, saying after all he managed to bring down a rare and magnificent silver deer, and the man beside him simply brushes it off, calling the Grand Duke a man who would obey the Emperor's will without question. Still, the Marquis pushes on, calling it unfortunate with even if the Grand Duke tries so hard, Her Majesty will never open her heart to him. The banquet hour arrives swiftly, and after conversing with several guests, the Emperor begins to appear unwell, prompting her maid to instinctively ask after her condition. She responds dryly, claiming she must be a little tired as the founding festival had her running around since dawn. Her maid offers to bring her some chilled water, walking away immediately. After some time her maid returns with the water, but once she turns to accept it, she finds the Grand Duke standing in front of her instead, worry clouding his expression as he inquires about her health. Before she can respond, he suggests summoning the royal physician at once. She quickly shakes off her shock and refuses, insisting it is unnecessary. In a sudden fit of anger, she smashes the glass to the floor and orders him to leave. Silence sweeps through the banquet hall, every gaze turning toward the throne. The Grand Duke remains where he is, lowering his head as he pleads for her forgiveness. He admits he has been rude and crossed a line, asking only for one chance at pardon. She grants it, and he rises, his pleasant expression swiftly returning as he remarks that he is humbled by her mercy. Moments later, he gently wipes her hand with his handkerchief, but when the realization strikes her, she quickly pulls away. Composing herself, she announces that she will take her leave, asking him to enjoy the banquet a while longer. After she takes her leave, the Marquis approaches the Grand Duke, asking what she's troubled him with again this time. The Grand Duke, however, responds with calm restraint, taking the blame upon himself, but the Marquis presses on, insisting that there is no subject in the Empire more loyal than he, and yet Her Majesty treats him with such coldness. He continues, admitting that it was by his own hand the Emperor ascended the throne, but before he can finish, the Grand Duke's hand settles heavily on his shoulder, tight, deliberate, carrying an unspoken warning. With his blood-red gaze fixed on him, the Grand Duke remarks that he understands the thrill of such an auspicious day. Still, he cautions him to watch his tongue when so many ears are near, especially when speaking of those of high birth. That being said, he takes his leave, trusting he'll take his caution to heart from then on. The Marquis is left grinding his teeth in annoyance as he mutters the Duke's name under his breath, boiling at the thought that the Grand Duke was nothing but the Emperor's dog. Now, brace yourself, people, for the unexpected. The Emperor immediately stiffens as a familiar voice rings out. Even on a day like this, you're still buried in paperwork. The man continues explaining that he'd knocked and heard no answer, so he assumed he had permission to enter, only to find her completely absorbed in documents. She rises sharply in defiance, demanding to know why he wasn't still at the banquet enjoying himself a little longer. The Grand Duke, however, answers with calm composure, asking how he could possibly take pleasure in a banquet when his liege is unwell. He bolts the door without warning, then returning to their conversation he casually mentions that he got delayed sending off bothersome people. His steps quicken as he approaches, his words following just as urgently. He notes that her complexion is still pale, complaining that she always overworks herself, and admits it troubles him deeply. The spark of defiance that had flared within her quickly fades, replaced by an icy chill. Instinctively, she steps back, agreeing that she should rest and suggesting that he take his leave as well. His lips curve into a reassuring smile as he promises he will. But before she can react, his hand seizes her shoulder and he hurls her onto the desk, scattering the paperwork across the room. His arm winds firmly around her leg as she shifts nervously, and his hand rises to her cheek, stroking it with unsettling gentleness. He reminds her not to worry, insisting he had said he would take his leave. Yet his next words come like a chill, but not until I'm certain that your health is truly not in discomfort, Your Majesty. He pins her down onto the desk and she tries to protest, but he cuts her off, remarking that it seems she is already prepared. His tone deepens as he continues, confessing that under normal circumstances he would take his time and soothe her, yet today he finds it even harder to hold back. Just before sinking his teeth into her skin, he begs her forgiveness in advance, admitting he may be a little rough, still sulking over what had happened earlier that day. His bright red gaze fixes on her as he explains that the prey he went through such trouble to catch had been meant only to please her. He asks if it had failed to bring her satisfaction, and with a faltering voice she stammers that she never intended to belittle his efforts. She insists she had no such intentions, apologizing if she had offended him. His voice follows, low and taunting, as he murmurs, "Such an innocent Majesty, you react to every little thing I do, it just makes me want to tease you even more." She is lying there later, completely worn out, her eyes carrying a hopeless look as tears settle within them. She drifts into thought, back to when they first met. He'd knelt right in front of her and introduced himself to her, the Princess of Iranrod, as Enoch Rourke. His gaze locked onto her, unmistakable, as he asked what brought her outside at such a late hour. She remained silent, completely smitten by his looks, his gracefulness. Speaking again, he asked if she was unwell, and this time she turned her head to the side as she responded with a sharp no. Trying to hide her flushed cheek, she spoke with urgency, explaining that she was only just trying to practice her swordsmanship. Still stumbling on her words, she asked if he'll keep it a secret that he saw her, before rushing away the next minute with a threat. Time passed and their closeness improved. She casually mentioned one time she never thought he'd still be keeping that a secret after all that time. She thanked him with a warm smile, but his reply was dry. He was merely following her command. She lightly nudged him to not be so stiff since they're engaged after all, following that she added that he'd have no idea how happy she was when she found out he was her fiancé. But he remained silent. Maybe he was always such a man with so few words, while she was the opposite, a chatterbox. Then she remembered, wondering if she tried harder, maybe Enoch will also be happy to be engaged to her. If she tries just a little more, and Enoch ends up liking her too. But their time together was cut short. She held his injured body in her arms, telling him it was okay, promising to stay by his side until the very end. She promised to protect him, but he could only manage to call her by her title before he finally fell silent. And then she held him in her arms, confessing her love for him once more. In the present day, the soft ray of sunshine hits her pale face and she rises up after a while of contemplation. In the corner, a maid lightly comments that she hadn't risen for quite some time, so she was worried she might be unwell. She adds that she has prepared a light soup for her, asking how she finds it, but the emperor simply responds telling her she has no appetite. Noticing her disinterest in the meal, the maid mentions the Grand Duke's wish for her to eat it. She couldn't help it and continued, reporting that he was so concerned that she had overexerted herself. The next minute the emperor snaps, insisting she already said she was fine, but instead of arguing any further the maid calmly reminds her, "Your Majesty, it is an order from His Highness the Grand Duke." Hearing those words, silence fills the room again. She reaches for a spoon weakly, then with shaky hands dips it into the boil of soup in front of her as she thinks, "An order from His Highness the Grand Duke, you say? Truly, how insignificant." In a new scene, the emperor's voice rings through the room demanding to know why everyone is silent, questioning if the state council meeting has always been a place where only she speaks. After her speech, a man raises his hand seeking permission to speak. Once he has her attention, he explains that they understand her intention to reduce taxes, however they hope she will also take into consideration their concerns that it may cause difficulties in managing their territories. The emperor, however, counters his claim, stating how the famine has continued for 3 years now, insisting they cannot place any further burden on the citizens of the empire. But the man doesn't stop either. With a smile he tells her they're glad by her great concern for the people. However, does not each territory have its own method of relief? The emperor in response insists relief is something to be considered only after tax reduction has been implemented. This time a different man speaks. He raises his hand lightly, addressing her with her title before then calmly stating that if taxes were to be reduced, the imperial revenue will also decrease, asking how she plans to replenish the national treasury. Without hesitation the emperor retorts that some nobles have been using loopholes to avoid paying a single coin in taxes, sharing her plan to dispatch auditors this time and collect from them. The same man speaks again. This time he asks with a slight smirk if she believes there will be nobles willing to accept such a proposal. The emperor, maintaining her composure, simply shoots back, asking if there's any reason they shouldn't, saying after all, it was the duty of the ruling class to give when the nation is in hardship. Noticing the resoluteness in the emperor's decision, murmurs quickly fill the room, with each voice rising in protest. Taxes, even if this is an order from Her Majesty the Emperor, this is. Soon her hands begin to tremble on the seat from all the tension, and as if to put her mind at ease, a calm voice suddenly announces, "The Grand Duchy of Rourke will reduce taxes and accept the auditors." The whole room still, and all eyes quickly shift towards the Grand Duke, who continues speaking with such clarity, declaring that if there's any wealth acquired through illegal means, he'll gladly pay the fine as well. As if to caution him, the Marquis voice rings out from across him calling him, but without giving him a chance to speak the Grand Duke lightly retorts that if it is Her Majesty's will, he is prepared to comply with anything. A flicker of irritation crosses the Marquis' face, then naturally seeing the Grand Duke take such a stance, the others comply. Without saying any more words the Emperor steps out of the room, leaving the rest of the ministers. Following her, a man rises slowly. He calls the Emperor really fortunate, noting that few emperors have such loyal vassals as the Grand Duke. He places his hand on the table lightly, as he continues with his comment, wondering out loud if Her Majesty feels the same. Though Her Majesty is cold towards me now, with such unwavering loyalty, someday Her Majesty will acknowledge it. Unexpectedly the Grand Duke's lips curl, a grin tugging at the corner before he lightly retorts, "I can never be a loyal subject." Later, the Emperor sits outside, burying her head into her laps. She hears some footsteps approaching and instinctively raises her head, asking if she hadn't said she required no assistance. But before she can get a glance at the person, the Grand Duke's voice rings out from behind her, telling her he isn't there to attend to her, sending panic through her. She exclaims his name in shock, but instead of being surprised he casually mentions that she wore heavy makeup. Without any more words he grabs her chin, his thumb pressing hard against her lips as he notes sternly, "I placed you on the throne so you could close your eyes, cover your ears, and indulge in luxury in the depth of the imperial palace. Yet now you pretend to be a virtuous ruler, a role that does not suit you." She turns her head away, but that doesn't stop him. This time her crouches down, then as he leans in softly he suggests, "What your majesty can do is merely..." The next minute he pushes her down onto the lawn. With a hand over her mouth she silently protests, staying if someone sees them like that, but before she can finish he cuts in with an excuse, that he only wishes to confirm her condition, asking her to not be so tense. With a sharp voice he suddenly asks, why she's now being modest. Then leaning in sharply he offers to jog her memory a bit, "Surely your majesty has not forgotten what you offered to rise to this position in the first place?" A soft sigh escapes her lips in resignation, his sudden reminder sending her right into thought. She recalls how she knelt in front of him in her wedding dress while he noted that she was the only remaining member of the imperial family in the Iranrod Empire. Right in front of her he reminded her how long ago, there was a time when she spared only his life. In return he declared there that he was going to give her a choice. Will you take your own life with honor? Or not, or will you like to offer yourself to me and survive? Her hands trembled, inside her she was fighting a war, a battle between her pride and survival, and in the end, she yielded. In the present day her voice rings out in protests, telling the Duke it was still daytime. She continued insisting at night anything is fine but there. The Grand Duke however calmly responds that the garden is rarely visited. His sharp eyes lock onto the marks he'd made on her body before, then with a grin, he assured her there are no beasts around. He changes his mind and they end up laying together on the pavement, and finally a soft "why?" slips out of her mouth. He doesn't respond, he simply caresses her hair, then as he rubs her heated ear, he disclosed that he's instructed them to prepare the upcoming luncheon with dishes Her Majesty enjoys. He suddenly presses her ear as he notes that she must finish everything without leaving a single bite. Fighting her pride she asks if he doesn't intend to do it anymore. The Duke without wasting time quickly suggests that if she wishes, they could start right now, but she quickly refuses, trying to explain that isn't what she meant. The Duke comments lightly in response, saying she denied it so firmly it makes him a little disappointed. But she with her gaze softened gently ponders on how she can hear the sound of a heartbeat. She thinks it strange, at a time like that and in a place like that, to think she would realize that the Grand Duke is in fact, human. Outside her thoughts the Duke informs her he will wake her up at the proper time, asking her to rest easy and sleep without worry, and she agrees. He leans in to kiss her but he pauses and mutters to himself, "Your Majesty, you..." A few days later, a man slams his arm on the desk in anger, complaining that at that rate, they'll have no choice but to follow Her Majesty the Emperor's orders. Another man scoffs at the Emperor's plan to crack down on tax evasion, and another chimes in wondering how they will know what fault the auditors sent from the palace will try to find. Another man brings up the Grand Duke declaration to follow the Emperor, which immediately irritates the Marquis. He rants that that is precisely the problem, explaining that the Grand Duke must not be dragged along by the Emperor forever. He prattles on, insisting he's aware of the relationship between the two of them, but before he can finish another man cuts him off with a quick warning, urging him to lower his voice to risk anyone listening. The late Emperor. At that time the princess was deeply cherished. She was the first princess to be born in a century, in a royal family where daughters were rare, so it was only natural. He cherished her so deeply that he even compiled a list of men who possessed nothing but looks and character, so that Her Highness the Princess might live in comfort, loved only by her husband. Yet, due to Her Majesty, the Empress's opposition, his wishes were never fulfilled. The Empress on the other hand wished for her to marry someone she can truly cherish and love. And so the fiancé, Her Highness the Princess brought home, was none other than the Grand Duke's heir of Rourke. The blonde-haired man, having a similar experience, doesn't hesitate to share it. He mentions how when he came to the palace with his father he had the opportunity to see the two of them together. She looked truly happy. A man tilts his head, sighing loudly that now it was all in vain. Only a year after the two of them were engaged, the late Grand Duke of Rourke was executed for treason. Before he can finish with his story, a man sharply rises, declaring that just as Marquis Callan says, it seems the time has come to firmly convey their stance to the Emperor. He turns to the Duke Silas, asking what he thinks. He asks if he would be willing to act as a mediator between the Empress and them, sending a sharp joint through him. In a new scene, an attendant lowers his head offering an apology to the Duke as he explains that an audience would be impossible at that moment. Silas pushes on, he insists it is a matter of importance and asks if it is really so difficult to meet even for a brief moment. Sensing his reluctance to leave, the attendant quickly explains the situation. The thing is, Her Majesty is currently with His Highness, the Grand Duke of Rourke, and the conversation seems to be running long. On the other hand, inside the office, the Emperor grips tightly onto some documents as she pleads with the Grand Duke for a moment. He looks up at her, his gaze fixed on her as he pleads with her to speak, declaring that he will follow her will. He urges her to tell him what she wants, asking if she likes it over there. He gently takes her hand as he casually remarks that after just a few days' rest she's gotten sensitive again, adding that her skin has gotten clearer too. He places a kiss on her hand as he assures her that she doesn't have to hold back her voice. Flustered, she raises her voice in protest, mentioning that it was the office asking what if someone suddenly comes in. Like she'd feared, a voice from the door suddenly begs pardon for the intrusion. Her attendant informs her he has something urgent to discuss, asking if right now would be all right. Regaining her composure, she demands to know if she hadn't specifically asked for him not to let anyone in for the time being. He apologizes, however he informs her that the Duke, Silas, has requested an audience. Caught off guard by the Duke's unusual behavior, she softly questions why. However, the Grand Duke suddenly cuts in with a sharp question, "Will you see him?" He grabs her hand, flipping her over as he relates the question, asking if she'll grant the Duke an audience. He leans in, his carefully sculpted face looking above her as he asks calmly if he shouldn't fix her up first. A lord shouldn't show such a disheveled appearance in front of another vassal, especially here in this office. "As you yourself said, Your Majesty." The next minute her faint voice fills the room, begging the Grand Duke to stop. Outside, her attendant checks up on her, asking if she's feeling unwell. He asks if he may come in for a minute, but she refuses, explaining that it was because the teacup spilled, so there's no need for him to come in. The Duke, on the other hand, reminds her he told her there was no need to hold back her voice. He leans in, his breath warm against her skin as he asks what she thinks about letting out a scream or two, adding that she could even order him to slit his own throat. However, as she trembles in his embrace, she quickly responds faintly, saying that's the one thing she could never do, no matter how cruel she is to him. The Duke response is short, "When you accept me so generously like this, it only makes my habits worse." The memory of the time he'd stood by her side when she was sick flooded his mind. She opened her eyes to the sound of his voice laced with concern as he asked how she was feeling. She got up quickly, trying to adjust herself, assuring him she was fine, even adding that she must look terrible, but he flashed her a soft smile as he opposed her words, insisting she is always lovely. Curious, she'd asked if he'd come all the way from the Hand Duke's place just to see her, and he responded claiming he was worried, so the Empress graciously allowed him to visit. Actually, before he had a meeting with the Empress, she told him she was aware the engagement has been quite bothersome for him, adding that Erin has always been raised dearly since she was a child, so she can be a bit immature. But to His Majesty the Emperor and her, she is a precious daughter worth more than gold. So she hoped he'll treat her kindly from now on, warning that she wouldn't ever forgive anyone who hurts her daughter's heart. So tucked in the sheet, she hesitantly expressed that it was strange, him being kind like that. She confessed that she too he'd be annoyed since she was always chasing after him, but he quickly cut in, insisting that isn't true. As he stared at her, his thoughts reeled, a precious child worth more than gold. She confessed to him in that moment with a smile, stilling his movements. She rigged at his shirt, warning that if he kept being that kind to her, she'll feel like she can do anything, so you have to stay with me, always. Moving to his time on the battlefield. A man kicked as he sneered that even the mighty Grand Duke's house, once abandoned by the Emperor, became nothing more than a toothless dog. He tossed a document to the ground, calling him a fool. "Do you still not understand why you're stuck out here on a battlefield? It's because Her Highness the Princess gave up ownership of, and sold you off. She probably figured marrying that old Marquis Maxwell was better than ending up with a wretched little traitor like you." His thought shatters and his grip tightens around her neck. He lets go and she sits trembling from shock as she meets his harsh gaze. He casually grabs a handkerchief, then holding her leg to his chest he asks if it wouldn't be better not to receive an audience that day. If the Duke comes in and sees the scene, he will find out that Her Majesty knows how to enjoy herself even in the office. He glances to the side, long enough to notice her trembling hands. Before he can process anything she pushes him away, then looking furious she demands to know if he finds her so amusing. She urges him to speak, demanding he tells her just how much he thinks of her as a joke right that minute, but instead he calmly retorts that there's nothing more important to him than her. She lets out a bitter laugh before confronting him. Why not lock me away in the underground prison for life and torment me instead? Sell me to the lowest man and have me mocked? If you're going to ridicule me like this. However, the Grand Duke's voice cuts her off, his tongue repeating her words, the lowest man? He calls himself a servant whom she can use as she wishes, telling her there's no need for her to feel any shame nor any need to keep her pride. So as he softly wipes her body with the towel, he assures her all she needs to do is to simply ask for what she wants. She snatched her hand away the next minute, her voice rising as he insists even in that moment he's still deceiving her. She continues, saying he's never once followed her will, but his next word sends a chill through her. He tells her he's only given her what she truly desired. She loses control and strikes him across the face, but the anger quickly fades into fear. The Grand Duke, noticing this, leans in a calm voice he asks her to not be afraid of him. Noting he will never do anything to harm her, no matter how harshly she treats him. Her eyes sink in resignation as she states even though he doesn't see her as his superior, he sure knows how to say such things. The Duke doesn't budge, he simply lifts her chin, then with almost menacing certainty he tells her it was her choice to keep him by her side from the start. If you wanted to keep your pride you shouldn't have made that decision. Finally she yields, right, such emotions are not something I can demand from you. Then without warning she pulls him in for a kiss. Later the Grand Duke finally steps out of the Emperor's office. Noticing the mark on his cheek, her attendant rushes to him asking if he's okay, but he just mentions that the Emperor seems to be in a foul mood. As he passes beside him he warns him to be especially careful. The next time the Duke opens his eyes, it's to a voice insisting, even so, Her Majesty went too far for your grace to be slapped. The Grand Duke offers a humble response siding with the Emperor. He insists it's only natural since he displeased her, claiming rather, he should be grateful that everything was resolved with just one slap. He continues stating he must thank Her Majesty for her mercy while the Duke, stuck in thought, ponders aloud what he could have done to make such a mild person raise her hand. The Grand Duke's response is short, he tells him it is something he would never imagine. The Duke admits he is beginning to regret requesting an audience that day, hoping he will not end up provoking Her Majesty's anger himself. The Grand Duke, however, reassures him with a smile, declaring that in this world he alone holds the power to make her truly angry. The Duke remains silent, his gaze fixed, as the Marquis's words echo in his mind, how a year after their engagement, the former Grand Duke of Rourke had been executed for treason. His thoughts are cut short when the Grand Duke's voice rings out, asking what business he has with the Emperor. Holding a set of documents, the Duke refers to their last meeting, but before he can continue, the Grand Duke reaches forward, suggesting that it would be better if he heard it first, since Her Majesty is in a foul mood. The Duke pulls back, offering an apology before calmly explaining that this is something he must present to the Emperor herself first. As for the Grand Duke, perhaps he might hear of it later, through Her Majesty. The Duke pauses, his thoughts at this time unclear. Then after a while of silence he flashes him a smile as he agrees with him, saying if indeed it is a serious matter, Her Majesty should be the first to confirm it, after all, she is the ruler of the Empire. Just then the attendant returns again, this time he informs the Duke Her Majesty has agreed to grant him an audience. Later, holding a paper up, she asks if that is the statement from the nobles regarding the recent tax evasion audit, revealing she heard he took on the role of the mediator. Confirming her words, he discloses there's strong opposition among the elders. He continues, revealing some have even declared that they wouldn't attend future meetings. She doesn't argue any, rather, she simply asks him what he thinks. Do you also think I'm making unreasonable demands? Before he can speak, the elder's words replay in his mind, the man insisting his grace couldn't let his majesty keep leading him around forever, another joining in, calling it disgraceful seeing a childish brat use the name of the Grand Duke to throw his weight around the palace. Aren't you curious about what Her Majesty used to bring his grace over to her side? The Duke's words also resurface in his mind, after all, I'm the only one in this world who can truly anger him. He recalls how he'd first stepped into the room, how he noticed the Emperor, such a mild person. Was she crying? The Emperor suddenly calls him, startling him out of his thoughts. With her brow furrowed, she reminds him that he should know it is a grave offense to look upon the Emperor directly without permission. He apologizes immediately, but she just responds that she wasn't seeking an apology. Then moving on, she asks what his opinion is on the audit. Just as he opens his mouth to speak, his eyes catch something unusual in passing, though he does not linger on it. Turning back to the Emperor, he remarks casually that among the nobles, tax evasion is regarded almost as a tradition, which is why their resistance has been so fierce. Even so, he adds, negotiation is not entirely impossible. He begins to elaborate further but falters over his words, prompting her to cut him off. She tells him she understands his point before offering her thanks. Later, that same night, the Duke drops onto his bed in exhaustion, a long sigh leaving his lips. He pushes his head back a bit as he ponders on the situation of that day. The Emperor seemed a little different than usual. Is it because of his grace the Grand Duke? Everything comes back to him, how she ordered the Grand Duke to leave in anger unlike her usual mild personality, how the Duke proudly announced that he's the only one who can truly anger, the elder's words about the incident that happened back when the late Emperor was still alive, and only one question lingers. Just what exactly happened between those two? He suddenly snaps out of his thoughts, thinking he couldn't possibly risk his life over idle curiosity, telling himself over and over it's got nothing to do with him anyway. But in that moment of dilemma, the Emperor's image reappears in his mind. How from overlooking her usual expression, he was able to spot her trembling hands. That observation alone stirs something within him. Running his hand through his head, he doesn't fight it anymore and silently admits, but the sight of His Majesty today might just stay with me for a long time. That same night at the Emperor's palace, she opens a letter addressed to her, and it reads, "Thus, I am deeply pleased to receive Your Majesty's letter after such a long time. As for the matter of taxation, I thought it required discussion. If Your Majesty sets a date, I will come to the capital to meet you, Your Majesty's longtime friend, Marquis Claude." A breath of relief escapes her lips and she quickly drifts into thought. Considering how Claude has had ties with her since childhood, she thinks it'll be possible to persuade him. She recalls how Duke Heston has also recently been looking for a marriage match for his heir and thinks, if she's able to connect him with a suitable family, he wouldn't refuse. But despite that, she still had one outstanding problem, Marquis Bjorn. He has a rough temper and strong resentment towards her, and she has no idea how to win him over. She moves on to Duke Silas. Although he's been acting as a mediator, many nobles have been skeptical about the tax reduction from the start, so, who knows how it'll turn out. A thought suddenly clings to her. If only there were someone who could be of more help. She opens her eyes and asks the maid if those are all the letters for the day. The maid confirms and inquires if there is anything else she requires, but she dismisses the concern, saying it is nothing. Rising to her feet, she instructs that she would like to use the bath that day. The maid complies, asking how she should arrange the attendance, but the Emperor responds that it will not be necessary. As always, she insists she is fine alone and asks that no one be allowed in. Moments later, she reclines in the bath with her eyes shut. The stillness is broken when the Grand Duke's voice calls out to her, sending a flush to her cheeks. His hand reaches toward her as he urges her not to refuse, reminding her that she must not forget what she offered to come that far. Or, are you planning to pretend that our promise never existed? Her eyes snap open the next minute and she sits up trying to organize her thoughts, but before she can, a hand reaches for her from the corner and a deep, familiar voice follows, asking if she's finally woken up. She turns around to find the Grand Duke in his bathrobe, staring intently at her. Avoiding his gaze, she asks how long he's been there, and he simply responds saying not long. As his lips brush her shoulder, he remarks casually that she had been sleeping so soundly he hadn't wished to wake her. Still, he mentions that she seems startled, asking after if she perhaps had some terrible dream. Stumbling on her words, she says no, explaining after that since he hadn't come to her at all after that day, she was worried he might be angry at her. The Duke, however, remaining oddly calm, simply asks how he could dare be angry at her, addressing her as Her Majesty. He reveals afterwards that he'd gone to Marquis Bjorn's territory. He explains that he thought she might be concerned about the recent tax issues, so he gave him a stern warning. Leaning forward, their faces barely a breath from each other, he asks if she hasn't always found the Marquis annoying, and she responds saying, "It's just sometimes the Marquis is far too arrogant," so she was concerned. Then he slowly parts his lips, as if to kiss her, but he doesn't. She calls him, her heart only able to ask one question. Why? The back of his palm gently feels her forehead as he replies that her body feels hot. He suggests she rests early that day and immediately sweeps her up into his arms. She protests, but he simply assures her that he dismissed the rest of the attendants earlier. Once they're in the room, he places her gently on the bed, leaving to go add some more firewood to the fireplace. As she watches him in the distance, his back turned to her, a strange feeling stirs within her. Being like that, it feels just like the old days. In the distance, a slight smirk tugs at the end of the Duke's lips as lightly comments that it seems a lot has happened while he was away, asking after what she spoke about with Marquis Claude. She hurries to give him an explanation. It's just that he said he'd be visiting the Imperial Palace soon, assuring him it's the truth. But he just repeats her words, that he will come to the Imperial Palace, is it? Unfortunately, Your Majesty. That will never happen. She screams his name and then charges towards the fireplace, promoting him to ask what's wrong. He places his hand firmly on her shoulder to stop her from searching through the flames as she explains that Claude is a high noble with a lot of influence, saying if she can't persuade him she wouldn't be able to stop those who oppose her, and he knows that too. The Grand Duke leans forward, his voice sharp and deliberate as he asks how she intends to persuade the Count, and she immediately responds, insisting the Count is kind by nature, so if she speaks to him gently she's sure he will help. The Grand Duke lets out a dry scoff before speaking again. He tells her that if she truly knew the way he looked at her, she would no longer wish to see him. Confused, she asks what he means, but he only presses a thumb beneath her chin, tilting her head upward. With steady words, he tells her that if she wishes to sway the high nobles, it would be far quicker to seek his aid. He adds, almost mockingly, that he is always willing to play along with her so-called charade of being a wise king. A wave of resignation washes over her, and she turns her gaze aside. As the documents burn to ash in the flames, she closes her eyes, a single tear clinging to her lashes. In a new scene, several nobles approach to greet her, offering their congratulations on the first anniversary of her enthronement. She thanks them in return for attending her celebratory banquet, assuring them that their greetings are enough and asking that they not concern themselves with her but instead enjoy the evening. Yet their eyes shift nervously as one of them struggles to speak. She sighs, asking if there is something more they wish to say, but he only bows and replies that there is not. From the side, the Grand Duke unexpectedly speaks. He tells her they only keep coming to her because she isn't going to the stage. He continues, explaining that if she doesn't dance the first dance, the others wouldn't be able to dance either, but her response is rather dismissive. She simply calls it a useless thing to do. The Grand Duke casually asks why she's acting that way. Resting hand on her shoulder, he offers to jog her memory a little, mentioning how she used to be the one who pestered her father to attend banquets, changing her dresses several times, looking truly happy. Just then her voice cuts through the air, sharp as she insists it was different. Back then, rather, everyone is now. Moments later, Duke Silas arrives and pays his greetings to her. He lowers his head in a graceful bow, as he mentions he wanted to personally congratulate her. She thanks him, however he waved off her generosity, claiming it is an honor to be invited alone. He turns to leave, however she calls him back. She drifts into thought in that moment, recalling how the Duke was the one who acted as a mediator in the recent tax issue, and although Enoch was the one who ultimately handled the opposition, the Duke took on the role of mediator, which he didn't even need to do, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to take that opportunity to thank him. Sitting composed, she asks if he's aware that the banquet can only start after the Emperor or Empress dances the first dance. Then she pops the question, so the people here can enjoy themselves. I was wondering if you'd dance the first dance with me. She stretches her hand forward, her face bright with new hope as she awaits his response, and he accepts, agreeing to take her to the stage as she wished. His hand clamps around hers as they take the stage. He spins her around and she lets out a sharp cry, prompting him to ask if she's okay. He informs her he'd hold her, asking her to move slowly, and she apologizes. She explains that it's been far too long since she'd last danced like that. Although it's embarrassing, she admits she still feels a bit tense, explaining that it feels as though the popular dances have changed a great deal lately. Averting her gaze shyly, she lowers her voice to a whisper as she tells him she hopes he'll overlook it if she was to make a mistake. Heat rises to his cheeks, and as he leads her through the steps, he remarks lightly that even if it is one of the latest dances, it is not much different from the past. He asks permission to teach her a few steps, and she agrees, admitting it is not a bad idea. Yet before she can question how he intends to do so, he suddenly spins her around. A moment later, he lets out a light laugh, remarking that the most effective way is to try it yourself, of course. Caught up in the moment, she asks if that isn't too fast, but instead he responds with a question, asking if it isn't more fun that way. How is it, Your Majesty? For a moment, she seems to forget every other person's existence, as his questions linger in her mind. It's more fun this way, is it? Indeed, she agrees silently, perhaps it's enjoyable. She glances to the side and catches a glimpse of the Grand Duke, the sight instantly draining the color from her face. The Duke calls to her, but she pays him no heed. Instead, it is another voice she hears, the Grand Duke's, asking if she has already forgotten the crime she bears. Several years earlier, in the Leinster Empire, her father welcomed her warmly as she arrived at the banquet. Overjoyed, she rushed into his arms before turning her gaze to her mother, mentioning that she had heard the debutante ball was being held especially for her. Brimming with excitement, she promised that the day would be the happiest of her life. They showered her with many compliments, until a familiar voice called out to her, immediately getting her attention. Enoch lowered himself in front of both the Emperor and Empress, offering his greeting before the throne. The Emperor thanked him for his attendance, then leaving Aaron in his care once again, he urged them to go on. They stepped onto the stage, and with excitement she showed Enoch the hidden sparkles on the underside of her skirt, sharing a secret, that the seamstress had sewn countless jewels there. He asked if she was certain she should be revealing such a secret to him, but she only responded cheerfully, admitting after that she had done it to impress him. Just as she was about to continue, the Imperial Knights suddenly stormed in, declaring that the Grand Duke of Rourke was under arrest for treason. The then Grand Duke resisted fiercely, insisting it was a frame-up, a false charge. As they forced Enoch down, she cried out, ordering them to stop at once. Desperate, she called to her father for help, only to hear his cold command that she be taken back to her chambers. She called out to him again, ready to protest, but his voice halted her, telling her not to worry. Turning back, she found him with a smile fixed on his lips as he assured her that nothing would happen to her. But those words became the first lie Enoch ever told. Later in her room, she smashed items around in anger, refusing to believe Enoch was a traitor. Her maid, however, informed her the Emperor had already ruled on all charges. The Rourke ducal house will not escape execution for treason. The Grand Duke and his wife were executed just yesterday. She asked about Enoch immediately, and her maid hesitantly revealed that the young lord's execution was scheduled for a week from then. She stumbled from the shock and soon after collapsed into unconsciousness. The next time she woke up, it was to the young lord's voice calling her gently. Recognizing the voice, she instinctively turned to find him sitting there in the dark. His appearance was far from that of a young lord's, as he casually mentioned he heard she hasn't eaten for days, asking afterwards what she planned to do if by chance her health got ruined in the process. She shot back, explaining that her father would listen to her unless she does that. Her voice softened as she expressed her relief. She grabbed onto his arm as she continued, "Father granted my request, he spared your life." She let go of his arm, her hand trembling as she softly caressed his bruised face, but his next word shocked her. "His Majesty the Emperor has reduced my punishment to stripping me of my noble title and making me a commoner. Thanks to your highness I've been shown mercy, thanks truly." Silence followed as tears streamed down her cheeks. Through her sobs, she lamented that she should have protected him, his family, everyone. She apologized again and again, vowing that from this moment on she would stay by his side, no matter what came. "I'll protect you." Then tragedy struck again. Her mother and father had gotten into a carriage accident and her mother wasn't lucky enough to survive the landslide. Her father, on the other hand, the then emperor, suffered a severe injury to his head, leaving him unable to move. Amidst that discussion, Iranrod stood expressionless. Then a familiar voice called out to her from behind. It was her brother's. She broke down in his arms, sobbing, while he urged her to trust her brothers from now on, promising that the two of them would look after her well in their father's absence. Yet behind his reassuring words, there lingered something unspoken in his eyes. Back in the present, the Duke's voice pulls her out of her thoughts. He asks if she is all right, and she stammers, struggling to force the words. At last, she forces out a trembling response, "I'm perfectly." The Duke immediately senses something wrong with her breathing. However, before he can react, the Grand Duke suddenly appears. He remarks that she seems fatigued, and as they walk, he gently urges her to lean on him, promising to guide her back to her seat. She settles down, barely catching her breath, when the Marquis suddenly approaches. With a sharp retort, he remarks that it has been far too long since he last saw her dance, yet her skill has not dulled in the slightest. He continues, remarking that the Duke, too, dances with remarkable skill, adding that even from a distance it was clear how well the two of them matched each other. Hinting at something, he comments that it would have looked even better if her partner had been the royal consort. Without hesitation, he points out that she is already past 20 and questions whether she should still be without a consort, and the Emperor, unfazed, simply responds that she has no plans to marry yet. He immediately shifts into an act, feigning concern as he insists that securing an heir is her foremost duty. Pressing further, he questions whether the succession issue can truly be ignored forever, yet beneath his insistent protests, she only lowers her head. Her mind immediately races with several thoughts, the most dominant being the fact that it's already been a year since her last monthly cycle. But how can she possibly say that she can't have an heir in that situation? Outside her thoughts, the Grand Duke simply asks why finding a consort must be the only way to show loyalty for the Empress. "Do you truly not understand? As you said, Her Majesty is not a man but a woman. Even without a consort, she is fully capable of producing an heir." Her face twists in confusion, but it's quickly drowned out by Duke Heston's rage as he demands if the Grand Duke is suggesting they place an illegitimate child on the imperial throne. His anger builds as he accuses him of disregarding 600 years of imperial legitimacy, even implying he must have other motives. The Grand Duke's glare cuts back at him as he retorts that a father's status is irrelevant, for no heir could hold greater legitimacy than one born from the Empress's own body. Duke Heston falters, scrambling for words, but before he can recover, the Grand Duke lays a hand on his shoulder. His gaze hardens as he whispers that he understands the Duke's desperation to make the young lord into the imperial consort, but asks if he truly means to use his own son like a breeding stallion. The Duke's voice rises as he demands to know what was just said, but the Grand Duke, with a calm edge, replies that he only speaks so because the Duke's intentions are already crystal clear. The Duke opens his mouth to argue again, but the Emperor's voice suddenly cuts through the room, sharp and final. Springing to her feet, she commands them both to end the back and forth at once. With a hand rubbing gently at her temple, she admits that she has only just taken the throne, and that even the burden of state affairs alone is already overwhelming. Matters of state and succession, she declares, should be addressed only once her reign has properly stabilized. Both of them offer their apologies to the emperor, and before leaving, Duke Heston swears he harbors no ulterior motives. She dismisses it calmly with a wave, saying she already knows. Yet the moment he steps out of her presence, his teeth clench and the Grand Duke's name escapes under his breath. He can't help but think that if not for the Grand Duke, he might have succeeded in persuading the Empress. As his gaze lingers, bitterness coils in him. The Grand Duke still carries himself so high and mighty, almost as if he were her fiancé. Could he be the very reason the Empress refuses marriage altogether? His hand rises to his chin as he broods in silence, wondering how he might tear the Grand Duke away from her. Considering how even after everything, that man still insists on playing the Empress's loyal hound. Later at the banquet, she lifts a glass of wine to her lips. Just as she parts them to drink, the Grand Duke's hand suddenly reaches in from the side, snatching the glass away. He raises it to his own lips and drains it with ease before glancing back at her. With a calm smile, he remarks that she seemed to be drinking more than usual that evening, so he wondered if the wine was special. But now that he has tasted it, it doesn't seem so. A group of noble ladies soon approach, offering their greetings to the Empress. She thanks them warmly for coming, her smile gracious. Then their attention shifts to the Grand Duke, and one of them asks whether he has no plans to dance that night. Lifting the empty glass slightly, he smiles and replies that he has had a bit too much to drink, so dancing would be difficult, but one of the ladies laughs lightly, pointing out that he doesn't seem drunk at all. The Grand Duke's expression doesn't waver as he explains that he cannot possibly show signs of drunkenness before Her Majesty the Empress. He adds that if the chance arises, he will be the first to ask for a dance next time. As his words linger in the air, her gaze rests on him, this simple interaction pulling her back to the past. He noticed her unease and quietly remarked that she didn't seem well, asking if something had happened. She turned her head aside, admitting she disliked him speaking with those girls. Pointing toward the back, she added that he had been smiling at them earlier, and he replied lightly that it was nothing more than a brief greeting. Her brow furrowed as she pressed on, insisting she still disliked it and asking if he was even aware of the things they said behind his back. They claimed their engagement would soon be broken off, that someone as fragile as her had no place in a family as rare and valuable as the Rourke Duchy. A bead of sweat formed on her cheek as she hesitantly began to confess that, from the start, their engagement had been forced because of her own whims. But before she could finish, he cut in with a firm yes. Confused, she looked at him, only for him to clarify. He assured her that he would never speak to those ladies again, asking, if it upset her that much, then how could he possibly ignore it? Back then, Enoch was kinder to her than anyone else in the world. Yet she also knew the way he treated her wasn't so different from how he treated other women. Enoch was kind to everyone, and perhaps that was why she so desperately longed for his true feelings. Without even realizing how fortunate she was, just to be able to see his beautiful courteous facade. She presses her teeth into her lower lip, before abruptly rising from her seat and stepping out of the hall. She steps outside, struggling to breathe, when sudden movement rustles behind the grass. A man's voice quickly calls out, assuring her he isn't an intruder. Without hesitation, he steps into view, and she freezes in shock. It's Duke Silas. Snapping right back into her usual air, she asks why he's there, even hiding himself no less, but he says he wasn't hiding. He explains that he'd come out to get some fresh air and then ended up seeing a flower he's never seen before, and he wanted to take a closer look, so he just sat near the garden for a bit. After listening to his explanation, a soft smile curves across her lips as she remarks that perhaps the Duke does have a delicate side after all. He lowers his head, his cheeks flushing with unexpected heat as he admits in a low voice that he's a bit embarrassed. However, she brushes it off, saying if anyone should feel ashamed it should be her saying that. He's confused for a bit, and she asks if she hadn't shown a shameful side of herself earlier. She continues and lightly reveals she feels like she put him in an awkward position, but he sharply denies her words. If anything, he continues as he hurries to counter her words. He discloses he was worried he might have been the rude one, but she says no. Her lips curve into a gentle smile as she thanks him, admitting that because of him, she has enjoyed herself for the first time in a long while and she's truly grateful for it. Also, she brings up the matter of the tax bill. She tells him she knows he worked hard to meditate until the last meeting, adding that dealing with the nobles couldn't have been easy, and with this audit, you're facing extra fines yourself, aren't you? But he suddenly speaks, telling her he didn't do anything worth being thanked for. He asks if in the end she didn't break the Marquis's will with Grand Duke Rourke. You say it's not a big deal, but without you, I wouldn't have even had the courage to stand against them. The Emperor admits. A few minutes of silence pass between them until the Duke's voice cuts through the air as he admits sometimes he wonders about her true thoughts. He continues, saying there are times he thinks she deliberately chose the harder path, but in response she simply asks who would ever choose the harder path on purpose, confessing that she simply had no easy options. The Duke's voice remains steady as he mentions choosing to make no choice can also be another option. But her thoughts are different. She tells him that isn't a choice, but rather, it's turning a blind eye. Her voice remains steady as she reveals just because she's weary of the nobles doesn't mean she can ignore the people of the Empire. If I don't step up, they'll bleed the citizens dry without the slightest restraint. Just because I'm an incompetent empress doesn't mean I've forgotten my duty. She turns to leave, but the Duke's voice stops her once more. He tells her that if she had not taken the throne, he believes she would have become a revolutionary. A soft chuckle escapes her lips as she replies that if someone like her ever started a revolution, it would not last long. The Duke agrees with a quiet smile, saying that does indeed sound like her. Without glancing back, she turns abruptly, only to collide with him. She stumbles, but he catches her in his arms. Steadying her, he clarifies that he hadn't meant she would fail out of incompetence. He continues further, saying even if such a revolution collapsed, he believes she would still be remembered as someone who inspired courage in others. The Empress turns sharply, her voice cutting through with a bitter edge. She remarks that perhaps she should have been a revolutionary after all, at least then she might have served as the stepping stone for someone else. The Duke follows after her immediately, asking her not to say such things. He reminds her that she has the great Grand Duke Rourke working as her hands and feet, and as long as his loyalty remains unshaken, there is nothing she cannot achieve. But she only answers coolly, pointing out that his authority is not the same as hers. He falls silent for a moment, then softly calls her title. Your Majesty, does the Grand Duke make you uneasy? She pauses in her track and then tells him she'll pretend she hadn't heard his question before rushes away finally. She returns to the fountain with her guards, who suggest it is time to head back to the palace. She shakes her head, refusing, and tells them they should walk a little longer, but before she can finish, the air is pierced by the sound of ecstatic moans. Her eyes snap toward the direction of the noise, and her advisor lets out a horrified shriek, demanding if those people even realize where they are. The Empress, however, only lowers her voice and instructs him to leave quietly. They begin to turn away, but before she can take another step, a hand shoots out from the darkness. It seizes her, pulling her back into the shadows. She turns back immediately, about to snap. A soft voice shushes her and she immediately goes silent. She looks back to find the Grand Duke, who admits openly with a smile that he's indeed the one. He rests his head on her shoulder, his voice hoarse as he asks if she was hoping it was another man. He sweeps her off the ground the next minute without a single word. He presses her lips with his thumb for a moment and then turns her head to the front as he asks with a whisper if that wasn't what she expected when she came out there. Just like those two over there, shamelessly using the cover of the night to share their passion. Her voice immediately rises in protest as she denies his words, insisting she only wanted to take a walk. Then, like a maniac, yields for a moment. A walk? Huh, even now, you're lying to me. He assures her she can always be honest with him. Her voice trembles as she asks why, and in response he tells her he only wishes to give her what she truly desires. How would you like me to do it, She suddenly goes pale, her whole body shaking as she presses her hand over her mouth. Unable to hold it any longer, she snatched his hand off before hurrying to relieve herself. He goes to her, asking her to lean on him, promising to escort her all the way. A while later he wipes her face gently with a damp towel. Once she realizes he's present, she rises and thanks him for bringing her back, informing him she'll call a lady in waiting now so he can leave. The Grand Duke, however, simply tells her there's no need to call her, insisting he can attend to her as much as needed. Forcing the words out, his expression darkens as he asks if she now finds even his touch repulsive. She rushes to defend herself, asking when she's ever done that, and the Grand Duke responds with a question, "When your Majesty Gaga right before me, how could I not know?" He suddenly places a hand on her shoulder, his thumb digging into her skin as he asks, "If it's not that. Was it so unpleasant that I interrupted your private moment with the Duke?" She asks what he's trying to say, and he doesn't hesitate to explain. He points out that the minute she left the ballroom, she went to meet the Duke, asking if she was trying to make him crown prince just like Duke Heston. "I thought all you were good for was trembling in fear, but you seem to know how to flirt with a man as well. Tell me, you want me, or is it the Duke you want?" She tells him she doesn't understand what he's talking about, but he only persists, asking if it wasn't because of the Duke she rejected him so fiercely. "You never clearly tell me what you want, so what do you want, your Majesty?" She grips tightly onto his shirt as she explains that it's nothing like that, but only his cold silence follows. He suddenly produces a blindfold, his voice low as he tells her he's certain there is something she desires from him. In the next instant, he slips the fabric over her eyes, plunging her into darkness. She calls out to him again and again, demanding to know what he is doing, but he offers no answer. She asks why he's acting that way all of a sudden, but he remains silent. He begins undoing his buttons as he tells her he's sure she's noticed he isn't in the best of mood. "I think I'd feel better if your Majesty moaned and cried out in pleasure for me. It's not a difficult thing, is it? All you need to do is stop resisting foolishly." After a while he asks if she can still not give him an answer, asking again what it is she desires, but she remains silent. His eyes darken as he passed a remark, calling it a shame. He rises, leaving her alone on the bed. The moment she realizes, panic spills into her voice as she calls out frantically, demanding to know where he is going. Her hands fly to the blindfold, tugging desperately to pull it off, yet before she can, the Grand Duke's voice cuts through the air from the side, warning that if he were her, he would not do that. She protests, insisting she can't see anything, but he only reminds her that this is the very purpose of the blindfold. The weight of isolation sinks in, and tears begin to stream down her face as she begs him to remove it, asking how long he intends to keep her like this. Her desperate pleas echo through the room as she reaches out blindly for him. Then, as expected, her balance gives way and she stumbles, yet, unexpectedly, his arms close around her, catching her before she can fall. The edge of the Grand Duke's lips curl into a smirk as her comments that he never thought she'd be so desperate to find him. Slipping off the blindfold, he retorts that she's way too shy to ever show her true feelings, so he'll just let her off just that once. He raises her head to meet his gaze before commenting, "This side of you, only I get to see it, even if he's a duke." As her tears blur her vision, a question echoes in her mind, why? Why is he making that face? Slowly the truth claws at her, now, little by little, the things I once knew, the things I once loved. They're fading, becoming so faint I can hardly recognize them anymore, so I chose every time to run away into dreams. Hoping that in dreams, the people I loved could remain, unchanged, forever. This time in her dreams, she heard her father calling out to her. She burst into his office. With her tear-streamed face she confirmed if he was the one who threw her wooden sword away. He tried to feign ignorance, but she caught him in his act and asked him not to pretend, since she already saw him come into her room the other day and take it. Through her sobs she reminded him of his promise that once her birthday came he'd teach her swordsmanship, but when her birthday came he delayed it over and over again, saying she was too weak. She persisted, asking why she was the only one not allowed to learn anything, noting her brother's practice with the sword and study too. She insisted that in the whole imperial palace there was no bigger fool than herself, but her father stepped forward, asking if there is another fool in the world who could sway the emperor like she can. He gently patted her head while she responded, saying that's because he loves her, insisting being loved and not being a fool are two different things. Or, is it that I have no other worth besides being loved? To set her at ease he went down on his knees and explained that the reason why he doesn't grant her rights is because every right comes with countless burdens. You're too weak and fragile to bear them. Without rights or duties can you not simply live happily? That's all I wish for. Then he made her a promise there, that if the heavens and earth were to turn upside down and she became emperor, then he would admit he was wrong. But the heavens and earth did turn upside down, and she became the emperor. But, the father who should have admitted his wrongdoings, had already passed away from this world. Later, she sits upright on the bed. The Duke asks if she isn't thirsty, mentioning that he has brought water. She accepts it with a faint thanks, her expression indifferent. Sitting beside her, he suddenly recalls that she had said she was going to see a play that day. Reaching toward her, he asks if she knows what kind of play it is, and she admits she doesn't, not yet. His fingers brush lightly against the cup in her hand as he reveals that it is, in fact, a play dedicated to her by a well-known playwright. He adds that it tells the story of a beautiful emperor who falls in love with a loyal knight. Discomfort flickers across her face, and she instinctively blurts out, "What if someone has discovered them?" The corner of his lips curves into a smirk as he presses her to clarify what she means. But in the next moment, slipping back into his role of loyal retainer, he assures her that even if anyone dared to speak about the two of them, he would handle it, urging her not to worry. Still, he leans closer, his voice lowering to a whisper as he asks if it isn't fascinating to see how the people perceive her. Then his hand suddenly catches her chin, holding her still. His voice sharpens as he reminds her that once, it was fashionable for every household to hang a portrait of the noble princess. Instinctively, she protests that those days are long gone. But his tone hardens, cold and commanding, as he breathes, "Your Majesty, smile for me." She freezes at the strange request, but he urges her again. Her eyes dart nervously, panic-stirring, yet she forces a smile and quietly asks why. He rises abruptly, brushing it off, telling her not to mind. He mutters that he shouldn't have asked for something so foolish. Turning back once more, his expression hardens as he admits those days are indeed long gone, because now, no one desires her anymore. Only he remains at her side. Outside, the Empress lingers in the cool air when a familiar voice calls from behind, remarking that he never expected Her Majesty to take an interest in a romance play. He notes that she doesn't exactly look as though she's anticipating it. Before responding, her thoughts flicker back to the Grand Duke, recalling the way he had asked if she was truly so upset about him interrupting her secret meeting with the Duke. Quickly, she turns, her eyes scanning until they land on the Grand Duke in the distance. Only then does she return her attention to the Duke beside her. Covering her mouth with her fan, she tells him that it isn't as though she isn't looking forward to it. The Duke leans closer, asking if perhaps this play contains something she might especially enjoy. She dismisses the thought with a small wave, admitting she doesn't care about the details, so long as the story ends happily, she will be satisfied. She even hopes the performance that day will end the same way, and he answers easily, saying he's certain it will turn out just as she wishes. As the conversation deepens, he adds lightly that perhaps one day she won't be the heroine of a romance but of an epic war tale. She responds dryly, wondering aloud if he means an epic war tale rather than the story of a failed revolutionary, and with a smile, he replies that a happy ending seems far better suited for her. Leaning in, his voice lowers as he assures her that if no one else will write such a tale, then he certainly will, just for her. Then, pressing further, he paints a picture. "How about this? Your Majesty is incredibly strong, wielding a sword even larger than the Grand Duke's. This time, she laughs, unable to help herself, calling it nothing but ridiculous nonsense. But behind her, the Grand Duke stands, his red eyes fixed, his expression unreadable. Suddenly, his voice cuts through, sharp and unmistakable, remarking that they seem to be enjoying quite the pleasant conversation. Your Majesty, Duke Silas, if you don't mind, may I join you? He greets the Duke with a casual remark about how often their paths have been crossing lately, extending his hand in what seems like a friendly gesture. But the moment their palms meet, the pressure of his grip is sharper, tighter than a normal handshake, carrying an edge that doesn't match his words. The Grand Duke, composed and unreadable, only asks what the matter is. Yet the Duke brushes it off, insisting it's nothing, even as his own thoughts begin to spiral. Could he be imagining this tension? But as the grip lingers, firm and unyielding, the doubt quickly slips away. From the very start, the Grand Duke's demeanor feels off. Is he trying to pick a fight right here? Just as the Grand Duke parts his lips to speak, a voice cuts through the air announcing the commencement of the play and urging the audience to take their seats. The Grand Duke merely calls it a shame before turning his attention to the Emperor, leaving the Duke standing behind, stewing in the thought of how close he had come to making a foolish move. His hand clenches into a fist as he admits to himself that the Grand Duke had been openly provoking him. There was nothing to be gained from clashing. He exhales, resigning. It is better to end it here. From the beginning, this had nothing to do with him anyway. Later, as they settle among the audience, the hall grows quiet, the silence broken only by the voices of the performers on stage. Then, without warning, the Grand Duke speaks. His tone is calm, almost conversational, as he remarks that the role seems miscast, adding with ease that she looks nothing like the one she is meant to portray. She replies dryly, asking if that is so, but he only shifts the conversation, questioning why she laughed earlier. Instinctively, her gaze flicks to the side, confusion tightening her features, but before she can dwell on it, his voice comes again, urging her to smile. If she does not, he warns, she will end up crying. She starts to ask why, but the words catch in her throat, swallowed down as her teeth press hard against her lips. A moment later, her mouth twists into a trembling smile, fragile and forced, as she asks if that is good enough. The Grand Duke answers in a low voice that it was not such a difficult request, wondering aloud why she could not simply do it. She forces out that she did, but he only reminds her he had told her before he does not want that kind of smile. Feigning ignorance, she insists she does not understand what he means, and the Grand Duke doesn't press the matter any further, he only dismisses it, his voice cutting through, cold and unyielding, as he retorts that it does not matter since for him, even her tears are enough. Behind the stage, she clutches the curtains, her hand trembling with strain. He leans in close, his tone laced with teasing amusement, remarking that at this rate, hers will be the only voice echoing through the hall. As the exchange continues, he suddenly observes that if she enjoys it so much, it hardly seems like punishment at all. Then, without a pause, his command falls sharp and uncompromising, he orders her to get on her knees. A faint trace of mockery colors his next words as he assures her he expects she will do well, noting that she is, after all, quite experienced. The weight of his presence bears down on her, her body feeling heavier than usual as she raises her hands slowly. A smirk curves across the Grand Duke's lips as he cautions her not to overexert herself. Time drags until at last she pulls away, coughing hard. Meanwhile, he does not move to help, only watches, standing tall with a smile of quiet pride. And then, as though granting her a final verdict, he commends her, telling her she had done very well. He sits on the bed, reaching out to gently wipe the corner of her eye with the sleeve of his garment. Leaning closer, his voice softens as he asks if she is all right. Helping her to her feet, he guides her back toward the audience as though nothing had happened. Her eyes sink with exhaustion, and she convinces herself that this much is enough for the day. The setting had been awkward, yes, but still tolerable, and above all, it had not even hurt much. Perhaps the truths had been too heavy for her to fight against, but her feelings spill over regardless. Before she realizes it, a tear slides down her cheek. Maybe it is her soft sniffles that draw his attention, but the Grand Duke glances to her side, usually after making the Empress cry like that he'd feel at least satisfied. Because when he saw that face, he saw it as proof that she belonged only to him. He had seen her smile often enough to be sick of it, so in truth, he did not care if she never smiled again. But perhaps in that moment he caught himself slipping, straying too far into the depths of his thoughts. He immediately forced himself back, hardening his resolve with a reminder, the Empress must never be forgiven. That's all for now, guys. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe and comment, and also I'm sorry for the late uploads.